I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus decried the potential end of federal abortion rights on the House floor Thursday. This comes after a leaked Supreme Court draft opinion revealed Roe v. Wade could be overturned. Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal denounced such a move as a, quote, culmination of decades of insidious work from the extreme right. Listen in for more.
I thank the Speaker very much. It is not often America seems to be stunned by an action of this government. They may be disappointed, they may disagree, but I can assure you they may not be stunned. In the leak of the Supreme Court decision, America overall, over 70%, are stunned by the idea that women no longer are equal in this nation. They do not have women's rights, human rights, or reproductive rights. And the tragedy for those of us who are lawyers, who understand the Constitution, is that when settled law has been announced, that is your belief, to see that that is no longer the standard of the highest court in the land, we are stunned, and yes, we are frightened. Roe v. Wade must be codified, reproductive rights must be protected, and the anti-vigilante stalking bill to stop individuals from stalking women who are simply seeking health care and abortion
the
should be passed
time has expired.
by the House of Representatives. I yield back. We must stand for human rights and women's rights. I yield back.
Are there any further requests for one-minute speeches? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Maloney, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and exclude extraneous material on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
It has been, Madam Speaker, nearly 2 weeks since the world saw the Supreme Court's draft decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. We all had suspected it was coming, so I rise today to oppose that decision and to oppose what has become the tyranny of the Republican minority, a minority that has worked for decades to restrict the rights of women and minorities. The extremist Republican minority has worked systematically over the years to politicize the Supreme Court by packing it with activist ideologues who hold views in line with the demands of these extremists. And now this Republican minority, after successfully packing the court with ideologues, they now seek to use this decision to return women to a dark time, a time when a woman had no right to decide for herself, to a time when abortions were illegal. But let's be clear from the start, this whole argument is not really about whether or not there will be abortions in this country, for there have always been, and there will always be abortions in this country and around the world. The only question is, will those abortions be safe and legal? In 1973, the year of the decision, I marched with many women and fought for Roe v. Wade. On the day in 1992 that Planned Parenthood versus Casey was announced, that decision, I announced that I was running for Congress because I objected to the restrictions they were putting on women. I wanted equal rights for women and more pro-choice legislators fighting for women in Washington. So I ran for office and won. And yesterday, I marched with my Democratic colleagues to the Senate in support of maintaining Roe v. Wade. Madam Speaker, I joined the majority of women in this country in strongly opposing this decision. The injustice, this march back to a darker time, and I will join them in marching, fighting, and legislating until our rights to control decisions about our lives and our bodies are secure. Because I believe there is no democracy if women cannot make their choices, their own choices about their health care, their bodies, including reproductive health care. Because if this draft Supreme Court decision takes effect, hundreds of millions of people in 26 states would be deprived of their right to choose, of their right to abortion. People of color, the LGBTQ+ community, young people, people with disabilities, low-income Americans, those that are the most marginalized will suffer the most. If Roe falls, state so-called trigger laws, end quote, already passed in 13 states, will immediately ban abortion in those states entirely. Also deeply troubling, this decision lays the groundwork for the court to tear down other fundamental rights, like the right to use contraception, marriage equality, and so many other rights. And all of this from the Republican Party that proclaims itself to be the party of smaller government, except when it comes to making decisions over a woman's life. So yesterday I marched again. I marched to the Senate with my Democratic colleagues and urged my Senate colleagues to pass the Women's Health Protection Act, like we passed here in this House earlier. This bill would establish a statutory right to abortion care across our country. But as they did earlier this year, the Senate came up short because there are not enough pro-choice senators to protect abortion rights for women. This is unacceptable, and every senator who voted against the Women's Health Protection Act must be held accountable by the American people, by their constituents. Madam Speaker, yesterday's vote has made one thing clear. The Senate is so far out of step with what most Americans believe. 80% of Americans agree that the decision to have an abortion should be left to a woman and her doctor, compared to just 9% who agree it should be left to politicians and the government. The Senate should reflect the will of the people and protect the right to control our own bodies, which is why we need to fight for a pro-choice Senate to protect our rights. We can and we must do everything we can to ensure that reproductive rights are the law of our land. Our lives, the lives of our children, and future generations depend on it. And I am happy now to yield to Representative Jayapal, who is the head of the Progressive Caucus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Maloney, for your tremendous leadership on so many issues, including reproductive rights, and for holding a hearing earlier in your committee on abortion and inviting several of us to testify before you. And I'm very proud to be here as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. This is our special order hour, and I couldn't be more proud to be dedicating this special order hour to this critical issue of women's freedom, because that's what we're talking about, is women's freedom. The leaked draft opinion from the Supreme Court represents an unprecedented, unlawful, and unjust attack on our constitutional reproductive rights. Reproductive rights groups and black and brown folks on the front line of this fight have been sounding the alarm for years that this day would come. The leaked draft opinion is a culmination of decades of insidious work from the extreme right who have rigged the system in their favor. I speak to you, Madam Speaker, today as one of the 1 in 4 women in America who have had an abortion. And for people to understand how I ultimately decided to have an abortion, I have to start with the birth of my first child, Janak. Janak was born at 26 and a half weeks while I was on a 2-year fellowship in India. She weighed only 1 pound, 14 ounces, and upon birth, she went down to a weight of just 21 ounces. Janak was so small, she fit into the palm of my hand. She was no bigger than a medium-sized squash. And for 3 months, we did not know if Janak would live or die. She needed multiple blood transfusions, she had to be fed drop by drop, and she constantly had her heart stop and restart. We returned to the United States after 3 months, and in those early, intensely difficult years, Janak had hydroencephalitis, water in her brain, she had seizures, and she returned repeatedly to the emergency room because of life-threatening pneumonia. The fact that Janak is today a 26-year-old beautiful human being is a true miracle and the greatest gift in my life. At the same time that Janak was born, I was also fighting to keep my legal permanent resident status, married to a U.S. citizen and with a U.S. citizen child, and yet without the ability to return with the same status that I had. In the end, I was able to return to the United States with Janak, provided that I started from scratch to qualify for citizenship. As a new mom, taking care of a very sick baby and recovering from major surgery myself, I was struggling. I experienced severe postpartum depression and post-traumatic stress disorder that was only diagnosed after I contemplated suicide and realized that I needed to seek help. My marriage did not survive. We split custody of Janak, and I was a part-time single parent. Shortly after, I met a wonderful man who is my husband today. I knew I was not ready to have another child, so I religiously took my daily contraceptive pill. Despite that, I became pregnant. I consulted with my doctors, who told me that any future pregnancy would likely also be high risk to me and to my child, similar to what I had gone through with Janak. I very much wanted to have more children, but I simply could not imagine going through that again. After discussions with my partner, who was completely supportive of whatever choice I made, I decided to have an abortion. 2 decades later, I think about those moments on the table in the doctor's office. A doctor who was kind and compassionate and skilled, performing abortions in a state that recognizes a person's constitutional right to make their choices about their reproductive care. For me, terminating my pregnancy was not an easy choice, but it was my choice. And it really shouldn't matter if it's difficult or hard of a choice. That choice, that freedom, is what has to be preserved for every pregnant person. A freedom that cannot be dictated by people in the minority pushing their extremist agenda on everybody else, the Supreme Court included. Until 2019, so for 15 years, I never spoke publicly or privately about my abortion. In fact, I didn't even tell my mother about it. Some of it was because as an immigrant from a culture that deeply values children and in a society that still stigmatizes abortion here in the United States, I felt ashamed that I never should have felt. But 2 years ago, I decided to tell my story as a member of Congress because I was so deeply concerned about the abortion ban legislation that was coming out from states across the country. And I became only the second member of Congress to publicly talk about my abortion. Today, as we are on the cusp of a horrific decision from the Supreme Court to criminalize women's rights and the right to an abortion, we all have to speak out to tell our truths if we are able. I want you to know that there are so many different situations that people face in making these choices. And whether the choice to have an abortion is easy or hard, whether there are traumatic situations or not, none of this should be the issue. It is simply nobody's business what choices we pregnant people make about our own bodies. And let me be very clear, I would never tell people who don't choose to have an abortion that they should have an abortion, nor should they tell me that I shouldn't. This is a constitutionally protected, intensely personal choice. I did not suffer the economic issues that so many poor people suffer. I did not suffer from living in a state that doesn't allow pregnant people to make these choices. And I was very privileged to live in a world post-Roe v. Wade, where abortion had been established as settled law as a constitutional right. Today, abortion is still the law of the land, and providers remain hard at work to give the care that so many desperately need and deserve. But it is clear that the Supreme Court, a majority on the Supreme Court, who were appointed by 2 Republican presidents who did not win even the majority of the popular vote, that the Supreme Court is poised to overturn this fundamental right to choose. And the communities that will pay the steepest price are our low-income communities, our black and brown communities, our LGBTQ communities. The Progressive Caucus and our members have been at the forefront of protecting these rights and ensuring that we in the House pass the Women's Health Protection Law, that we work to repeal the Hyde Amendment, and that we remove the stigma around abortion care and reproductive health choices. This is existentially urgent, and we will not allow the Supreme Court or the United States Senate, the people that voted against the codification of Roe v. Wade, to win in this battle. We will fight to the very end for our freedoms. Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, and I yield back.
I want to thank Representative Jayapal for your leadership of the Progressive Caucus and for your strength in sharing your very personal and painful story. It has given me more strength to fight this battle, and I hope it will inspire many, many more as we fight for our basic rights. I would now like to recognize a leader in the Progressive Caucus, Representative Mondaire Jones, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, it is absurd that in the year 2022, I have to speak to defend every human's right to make their own health care decisions. But because 6 far-right Supreme Court justices are set to impose their unpopular views on everyone in this country, I stand here to urge my colleagues to do everything we can to protect the right to abortion, including expanding the Supreme Court. I stand here for people in my family and folks in my community who could soon have their rights stripped away. People who, if they aren't able to get the abortion they need, will be trapped in a cycle of poverty. Folks who will no longer be able to work their job or get the education that they fought so hard to get. For me, this is personal, because it's people like my single mother who worked multiple jobs just to provide for our family, black and brown folks, and the poorest people in our society who will suffer most from the extreme decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. 50 years of settled precedent out of the window because Republicans on the Supreme Court want to interfere in people's health care decisions. Yes, the Senate must follow our lead here in the House and pass legislation that will secure the right to an abortion. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking that the 6-3 far-right court, which is preparing to overturn a 50-year-old Supreme Court precedent, and which has spent the last decade dismantling the Voting Rights Act, is all of a sudden going to start respecting the will of Congress. That's why we've got to pass the Judiciary Act of 2021 to add 4 seats to the Supreme Court, to restore balance and finally respect the will of the American people who overwhelmingly support Roe v. Wade. I want to now read an abortion story from a resident of Westchester County, New York, Lisa Hofflick, into the record. Lisa writes, "For almost 30 years, I could count on one hand the people who knew that I had an abortion. One was my boyfriend, and 2 were the nurse and the doctor who performed the procedure. Until now. I'm finally sharing a story I never thought I'd tell, one that I've kept personal and private because of the fear of judgment and stigma I thought I'd receive from the outside world. I was barely 20 years old and a college junior dreaming of becoming a television journalist. My boyfriend and I had been dating for only a few months. Like many women, my cycle was irregular, and so by the time I realized I was pregnant, I was 8 weeks along. I was terrified that my very strict parents would force me to quit school, move back home, and have the baby. I couldn't do that. I was a baby myself. It took me 2 weeks to save up the $500 in cash and finally get an appointment with a doctor to perform the abortion. I will never forget that day, the fear and the guilt I was made to feel. After learning that I was 10 weeks pregnant, the nurse shook her head and asked, "Why did you wait so long? Why did you wait so long?" Those words pierced me then, and they still haunt me to this day. My heart breaks for all the women and girls who still suffer in silence from the shame imposed on them. I eventually married that boyfriend, and we now have 5 beautiful children. But I know that if I had not gone through with that abortion, these children and the wonderful life my husband and I built for ourselves would not exist. I made the right choice, and I have no regrets. I made the right choice because it was my choice to make. As our fundamental rights over bodily autonomy come under siege, we can't afford to be silent any longer. I'm sharing my story to bring abortion out of the shadows and into everyday dialogue so that we can ensure they remain safe, legal, and accessible for every person. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Madam Speaker, how much time is remaining?
The gentlewoman has 40.5 minutes remaining.
I want to thank Representative Jones for sharing that story. It was very moving. And others that are watching, if you want to share your stories, send them to us so we can read them into the congressional record and share it with other Americans about the need to save a woman's right to choose. I now recognize one of the leading voices in Congress for women's rights and consumer rights, Representative Schakowsky, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank my sister and my colleague, Congresswoman Maloney, for taking the lead always on issues to protect women's rights. Thank you. I want to declare right now that women are not going back. Women will not tolerate being second-class citizens. I will not tolerate that my granddaughters will not have the rights that women have today. That fundamental, basic, threshold right in the United States of America in the 21st century will be snatched away is something not only unthinkable, but something that doesn't need to happen. Let me tell you my story, or a story that was told to me. I have a dear friend who told me, he's an adult man, about his mother, Shirley. When he was 11 years old, his mother, Shirley, was told that if she was going to carry to term the fetus that was in her womb right now, she would not survive. This tragically was just before Roe v. Wade was passed, just a couple months before Roe became the law of the land. The only place that abortion was legal was in New York. This single mom had to put the money together to finally get herself to New York, and she did. She scrounged that money, she saved, she borrowed, but when she got there, she was told at the clinic, too late. You were too far, she was too far gone in the pregnancy. She came home and celebrated the 4th of July with her children, and when she went to deliver, she died, leaving an 11-year-old son and 2 little girls to be orphans. I have a button that I've had for a long time that I wear that says, Roe was not the beginning of women having abortions. Roe was the end of women dying from abortions. Do you think that in this country the majority of Americans support the idea of allowing women to die? We know they don't. We know that the majority of Americans, the vast majority of Democrats, the 3/4 of independents, and yes, a majority of Republicans say no, that Roe v. Wade, the right to access an abortion, may not, should not be overturned. We have an opportunity right now in the United States of America, and it's called the vote. The vote. You know, we have what I would consider a rogue Supreme Court right now, that the filibuster was eliminated, the requirement for 80 votes, in order to get the current members of the Supreme Court there so that they could do this dastardly deed. But if we just go to the polls, we can change that. Not in the someday in the future, but in this next election. Hopefully we can get the Senate to do it, but I want to tell you that Mitch McConnell has already said what he wants to do is to suspend if they were to win the Senate, to suspend the filibuster, the 80-vote requirement, and make a prohibition on abortion the law of the land, not just for the states to decide. I want to tell you something, this is not going to happen. There's a tsunami out there of opposition to this. And it's not just women, it is men and women alike. It is about families who don't want to see a 13-year-old child, girl that has been raped, to be forced to carry that pregnancy to term. Are you kidding me? So I'm putting out a warning right now and a invitation to all people who think that women deserve that right to control their own bodies, to say, no way, hell no, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I now recognize the Representative Omar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you.
And I join my colleagues in thanking you for your leadership. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to speak against the cruel and unconstitutional leaked Supreme Court decision overturning settled law of the land, Roe v. Wade. To be clear, controlling decisions about our bodies is a basic human right. The government has no right to regulate what we can do with our bodies. Overturning Roe v. Wade is about control. It's about religious supremacy, and it's about harming women. It would fly in the face of decades of precedent and the overwhelming majority of public opinion if this decision is to hold. We know this decision will fall hardest on the most vulnerable in this country, women who have been abused, women who are the victims of incest, those who have been raped. But its consequences will even be more far-reaching than we can imagine. This will be a blow to everyone who believes in the 14th Amendment, to anyone who believes there's limit to how much the government can control the decisions we make in our private lives. we will be leaving our children and the next generation in a world with less freedoms than we have enjoyed ourselves. But it's shocking to me that all of this is being championed, and it's coming from a party that believes in small government, a party that talks about freedom, liberty. And this is the party now that wants to do everything that they can to tell women what decisions they can make about their reproductive rights. They want somebody like Senator Ted Cruz regulating your uterus. They want Senator Chuck Grassley having authority over your body. We have to say no. We have to stand up and we have to fight back. If you care about women's rights, you should be outraged by this decision. If you care about a woman's right to choose, you should be outraged. If you care about women having access to health care, you should be outraged by this decision. If you care about economic justice, you should be outraged by this decision. If you care about our basic freedoms, you should be outraged by this decision. It is heartbreaking to hear some of the stories shared by my colleagues, to hear about some of the stories shared by my constituents. But it will be even more heartbreaking to hear about the stories that will be shared if we do not protect a woman's right to choose. I think about many countries that I've visited where women are locked up serving 20 years in jail for having an abortion, where we hear about stories of women who die in back alleys because their families force them to have that baby. We hear about the stories where rape victims are forced to carry their babies to full term. This is shocking. And it is shocking because those stories are about to become the stories of young women in the United States of America, a country that is supposed to be a symbol of freedom, a country that believes and exports what it means for women to be celebrated as an equal, a country that talks about how glorious its Constitution is in guaranteeing the rights of its citizens. Now, this is about to become a country where women are crying out in pain because their freedoms are being impeded by Republicans who only say they believe in freedom but does not want to guarantee freedoms to women in this country. As an immigrant, I am proud to be an American. I am proud to be a woman living in this country. I am proud to be a mother of 4 children and give birth to 3 of them. I am proud to have been given the ability to make choices for myself that I might not have been allowed in the country that I was born in. But it pains me today to know that those who believe in religious superiority, those who don't believe in the fundamental rights for people to choose as they please in this country, might have the last laugh, and we might not be able to do anything about it. Not only do we have a narrow window of enshrining and codifying Roe v. Wade into law. But we also only have a couple of more months to make sure that this body and the Senate is not lost to religious extremists and our country be in their hands as they govern us to the gutter. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Representative Newman for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Maloney. So glad to be here tonight and so proud that you put this together for all of us. So, Mr. Speaker, to say that I'm deeply disappointed is really an underestimate. I have to tell you, many people in our country think that the word abortion is taboo. It shouldn't be said, shouldn't be uttered. And the Republican Senate reiterated that this week. But worse, it told women, we don't matter. It told women that we don't trust you. We told women that you should not have agency over your body. And I have to tell you, I haven't spoken about my personal abortion ever publicly until this week. And the reason is because of all of those reasons, is that you are shamed wherever you go. Even in this day and age, in 2022, women are still shamed. We have to stop that. 1 in 4 women in this country have an abortion. It is a common and something that people do actually every day. It is a common health procedure. You know, when I was 19 years old, I was barely halfway through college, I found out I was pregnant. I was working 2 jobs, scrubbing floors and tables to get through college, did not have the wherewithal, but more importantly, I did not have the emotional ability to be supporting a child. Not only did I not have the infrastructure and the financial resources, but I didn't have the wherewithal. And I recognized that. And it was a good decision, but it was still a difficult decision. And so when Republican senators tell us that we shouldn't have agency over our bodies, it just reaffirms this taboo and this shame. And I've had enough. All done. I will not allow people to shame me or anyone else that has had a standard medical procedure called an abortion. And I'm going to use that word a lot more than I have in the past, I will tell you that. But you know, I have greater concerns. In addition to having an abortion and having concerns about agency over body, I have real concerns for my trans daughter. She came down the night that that opinion was leaked and said, "Mom, what does this mean?" And you know what? I didn't have a lot of really great words for her. So when these reckless decisions are made by reckless people called Republican senators and extremists in their various religions, they don't understand that they affect real people. So that is the reason why I sent personal letters to all of the Republican senators plus Mr. Manchin, who is in that boat of saying that everything is taboo and we should be shamed and we shouldn't have agency over our body, and let them know that we are people. My daughter and I are people. And we are all going to speak up. And I just want to say one more thing about being people. We need people in this body that have the lived experience and have been fighting this fight for a long time. So it is really important that we all speak up, but it's really important that we mobilize as a country and that all these leaders in this body speak up. I have to tell you, I'm so disgusted that I haven't slept very well this week at all. But here's what I do know. I cherish everybody, all of my colleagues, my pro-choice colleagues. I cherish Chair Maloney, our Progressive Caucus, but all of our Democratic colleagues. And I'm so proud to be here, but we cannot let this happen. I know I'm mobilizing. I know everybody in this body is mobilizing. But I refuse to receive shame or be told that I should have shame or that I am a bad person because I had a regular medical procedure. I refuse to allow anyone to tell my daughter that she doesn't have agency over her body. So with that, I thank Chair Maloney for this opportunity tonight, and I thank all my colleagues. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Representative Levin is recognized for 3 minutes and will be followed by Jackson Lee. Barbara Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Maloney, for hosting this really important session. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with deep concern for the more than 2.2 million Michiganders who will lose access to abortion if this extremist Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. If this draft ruling holds, Michigan will return to a 1931 law that makes it a felony to perform or facilitate an abortion. We must call laws like this what they truly are: violations of human rights, bodily autonomy, and an egregious attack on essential health care providers. It must be affirmed in this House that abortion providers are essential and valued. They provide high-quality, compassionate, and necessary health care and deliver this care courageously despite pressures, restrictions, political interference, and violent threats to their personal safety. In March, I was proud to join a group of my incredible colleagues, Representatives Pramila Jayapal, Barbara Lee, who's going to speak next, Diana DeGette, Cori Bush, and Nikema Williams, to introduce the first ever resolution in Congress honoring abortion providers. We recognized Abortion Provider Appreciation Day in the memory of Dr. David Gunn, who was tragically murdered outside his abortion clinic in Pensacola, Florida, by a white supremacist, anti-abortion extremist in the first known instance of the murder of an abortion provider. Unfortunately, it was not the last. I thank Representatives Jayapal, Lee, and Bush for coming forward and sharing their own stories with abortion, and Representative Newman, who just did so. Not only have they demonstrated that people make decisions to have an abortion for an array of reasons, they've also empowered other women of color and people with lived experiences to stand by abortion providers in this critical moment. So today, I want to let all abortion providers know that they are valued. And I especially want to recognize two incredible abortion providers and tireless advocates in my district: Renee Chelian, the founder of Northland Family Planning, and her Dora Lara. I salute the work these women do in spite of the anti-abortion extremists who have put Northland in the headlines locally and nationally. Beyond its impact on providers, of course, this ruling will have devastating consequences for women, transgender, and non-binary people in their communities all across Michigan and this country. Simply stated, the government has no business interfering in the private health decisions pregnant people make about their own bodies and lives in consultation with their doctors. Let us proclaim loudly and proudly: abortion rights are human rights, and we must work towards a future where access to abortion is liberated from restrictions and bans universally. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Barbara Lee. Representative Lee, for 5 minutes. And I thank her for her leadership on this issue.
Well, first, let me thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, for your tremendous leadership. But also, I just have to thank you for your encouragement for myself, Congresswoman Jayapal, Congresswoman Bush, to really step out and talk about something that I personally have never talked about, ever, because it was my own personal business. As my mother told me, that's a decision that I made between her and myself. As now, which it looks like that liberty could be taken away. But even in the day, and this was way before Roe versus Wade, I had an abortion, and you gave me a chance to talk about it, which is something I would not do because of what I just said. It was a private decision. But once these draconian laws started passing in the states, and once these trigger laws were put into place, and once I saw what was taking place, I was compelled to talk about it, because once we tell these stories, what I learned, Congresswoman Maloney, was that there's so many people who have similar stories, men and women who came to me, people I've known for 30, 40 years came to me, whispered to me. I had the same experience. I was afraid to talk about it. And what I'm finding now is that more people are beginning to share their experiences. And I tell you one thing, it was, in addition to the privacy issue, it was about stigma. I mean, you know, I was raised in the Catholic school, in the Catholic Church. And of course, this is a huge decision anyone has to make. Nobody wants to have to go through this trauma. But I did, and so many others have. And so thank you for giving us a chance, because that helped me personally. And now we've come for such a time as this to really help others and to really highlight why the end of Roe could poise us to see the abandonment of 50 years of precedent and the first time a constitutional right has ever been taken away. That's unbelievable. It would deny millions of Americans access to abortions. We need to, however, reassure Americans tonight that Roe is still the law of the land. Abortion is still legal. But the threat of this draft opinion highlights why Congress preemptively should enshrine Roe into federal law by abolishing the filibuster, yes, and by passing the Women's Health Protection Act. This really is about our personal liberty and our reproductive freedom. Nothing less, quite frankly, can be tolerated in a democracy. There's a whole generation of people who do not know life before Roe. Again, going back to the day when I was in the 11th grade, I know a life before Roe. My mother fortunately had a friend, and I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and her friend, we had moved to California. She flew me to Texas because once I made that decision, her friend knew a clinic in Mexico. And so let me tell you, I was fortunate enough to survive the procedure, Chairwoman Maloney, but it's not lost on me that so many women who look like me were dying. And afterwards, I thank God that I survived because I knew so many people hadn't. Abortion bans affect everyone, but their impacts, they fall the hardest on people of color, people working to make ends meet, young people, the LGBTQ community, people in rural communities, people who just can't have or don't have enough money to travel, to go to another state. Study after study has shown that denying people access to abortion has devastating and long-lasting implications for their lives. So I reiterate, people with money will also have access to abortions. But we're here tonight because everyone, no matter where they live or how much money they make or their background or their race or their gender identity, everyone should be able to make their own decisions about their bodies, their lives, and their futures. And finally, I'll just say another part of this that is just outrageous is the fact that these decisions about our own health care could be criminalized. Can you imagine if that would happen? The thought of this is chilling. It's chilling. And so even though it's a terrifying moment, it's an urgent moment. The public supports Roe versus Wade. And now's the time to rise up, yes, to galvanize and to raise our voices about our constitutional rights that are about to be taken away if we don't do what we need to do. But also, it's a slippery slope because, as I've been saying, if they come for me today, they're coming for you tomorrow. And this is the beginning of the erosion of the rights, such as voting rights, disability rights, LGBTQ rights, you just name it. But that's not going to happen because I have a lot of hope in the American people. And this may be a time when we just have to regroup and fight harder. And that's exactly what we're doing. And I want to applaud all of our organizations out there who have been so adamant and so vigilant and prepared for this day. We couldn't be here tonight talking about what next if it weren't for them. And so I just have to take a moment to salute all of our grassroots groups who have been working day and night, helping people, providing access, raising money, doing everything they can do to make sure that everyone who decides to have an abortion has access to safe and legal abortion. So thank you again, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this, because it's a moment that we all have to speak truth to power. We have to tell the truth about what's at stake, but also it gives us a chance to tell the truth about who we are. As members of Congress, we are people who have been through many of the same challenges that everyone has been through. So thank you again.
Thank you for your leadership and for your courage. I now, Representative Chu is now recognized, and may I inquire of the Speaker how much time is remaining?
The gentlelady has 12 minutes remaining.
Ms. Chu, Representative Chu is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today during a dark time in our nation's history, when the right to an abortion, the fundamental right to decide what happens to your own body, is under threat. So today, I rise to tell the stories from patients and providers in my district. The stories I am about to tell provide a glimpse as to what life will be like if Roe versus Wade is indeed struck down in the final decision of the Supreme Court. These stories come from my local Planned Parenthood, Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley, which offers high-quality health care from STD testing to contraception and abortion care. But since the Supreme Court decided to allow state-based abortion bans to remain in place, it has become such an incredible resource, not only for my constituents, but for those living in other states where abortion is not as accessible. Just last month, a mother of 4 and her husband drove all the way from Houston, Texas, to the Planned Parenthood Health Center in Pasadena, California, in my district. Because of Texas's draconian vigilante law, SB 8, she was unable to get care at home because she was 7 weeks pregnant. This was just 1 week past the state limitation. So she did not have options in Texas. But she and her husband knew that another child was not the right choice for them. So they put all 4 of their children in the car and drove for 20 hours to Pasadena. They came to Pasadena because after searching everywhere in surrounding states, the appointment in Pasadena was the soonest one she could get. She was not wavering in her decision. She was sure she wanted an abortion. She and her family spent a day and a half driving to California, a day in California when the procedure was done, and then had to spend another day and a half driving home. The time, the expense, and the time off work to have a 3-minute procedure done is an undue and egregious burden that people are already facing when trying to access safe and routine abortion care. This mother was in and out of her appointment within 2 hours from start to finish, but had to spend over 40 hours of time and money to access health care that should be readily available to anyone who needs it. Another patient from Texas came to Planned Parenthood in Pasadena in March of this year. She had originally scheduled to go to Oklahoma for a medication abortion, but felt that she needed more time to decide if terminating her pregnancy was the right choice for her. After taking a few days to think about her decision, she lost that appointment in Oklahoma. So she flew to California to receive a medication abortion at 9 weeks pregnant. She and her support person had to incur the cost of the flight to Los Angeles and an overnight hotel stay, as well as time off of work to access abortion medication. These are just two stories out of the hundreds of patients that Planned Parenthood Pasadena sees every day. But it illustrates what we are talking about with regard to the right to an abortion. We mean real people, and real women with lives and jobs and families whose right to decide what to do with their own bodies and their own futures have been taken away by politicians looking to score political points. It's wrong, it's cruel, and it's unjust. I will not stop fighting to enshrine abortion rights into federal law and for passage of my bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, which this body passed in September of 2021 by a vote of 218 to 211, making it the most supported abortion rights bill in the history of Congress. I will continue to fight for these patients, to fight for these women, and to fight for the hundreds of patients like them every single day who deserve quality health care. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and I thank Representative Chu, the founder and chair of the Aspire Caucus, for her leadership on this issue. She is the author of the Women's Health Protection Act, which we supported and passed in this House, and which we hope to pass in the Senate, and which we will fight with all of our strength to pass eventually. I want to thank all of my colleagues for sharing their stories, the stories of their constituents, and ask the public to send us your stories so we can read them into the record as we talk about the need to protect the freedom of women to make choices about their own health care. I firmly believe that there is no democracy if the women in this country, half the population in this country, cannot make basic decisions about their own bodies, their own health care, their own choices, including reproductive health care. I thank all of my colleagues that have reached out and said they wanted to be here tonight, but they couldn't for other reasons. We hope to have future speak-outs, future special orders, and at this point, I am closing and yielding back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your statements.
The gentlewoman yields back.